Hey, I'm Devesh, and if you own a truck or you're thinking about buying one, this channel is going to save you thousands of dollars. Every week we break down the things dealers, automakers, and the government don't want you to know. Hidden scams, engineered failures, and the real truth behind the trucks Americans depend on. No fluff, no sponsored opinions, just straight facts that put the power back in your hands. Hit subscribe, because the next video might be the most important one you watch before your next truck purchase. Ford just buried $19.5 billion. Not lost it, buried it. Killing a truck they swore would change America, and they don't want you to think too hard about what that means for the truck sitting in your driveway right now. Here's what's actually happening. Two of the biggest truck makers in the country are quietly walking away from vehicles they promised you were the future. Not with press conferences, not with apologies, with layoffs, plant shutdowns, and accounting entries that get buried in quarterly filings most Americans never read. The F-150 Lightning is dead. GM's electric Silverado and Sierra might not exist much longer than the current generation, and the reasons they're giving you don't even scratch the surface of the real story. Let's get into it. Start with Ford, because Ford made this personal. When they unveiled the F-150 Lightning in 2021, they called it the most important vehicle since the Model T. That wasn't just marketing. That was Jim Farley, the CEO, standing in front of cameras comparing his electric pickup truck to the vehicle that industrialized America. Bold claim. And they backed it with a price that got everyone's attention. $40,000 starting price. Affordable, accessible, the working man's electric truck. Then something happened. By late 2022, that $40,000 price was gone. Ford bumped it to $52,000, then $56,000, then past $60,000 on the base trim. Within a single year, the truck went from a blue-collar promise to a luxury item, a 50% price increase in 12 months. If your mortgage payment went up 50% in a year, you'd burn something down. Ford just quietly updated their website and kept moving. And they kept losing money anyway. By 2024, Ford's Model E division, their entire EV unit, posted a $5 billion loss in 1 year. That's billion with a B. By the time they finally pulled the plug on the Lightning in December 2025, Ford had racked up $13 billion in EV losses since 2023. $13 billion spent convincing you the electric truck was the future and then writing it all off when it wasn't. The write-down they announced? $19.5 billion. They're going to absorb $19.5 billion in charges, most of it landing in 2026, including an $8.5 billion asset write-down for the Model E division. Think about that number for a second. That's enough money to give every truck-owning household in America roughly $3,000 in cash. Instead, it evaporated trying to build a truck nobody could afford after Ford finished pricing it out of existence. Now they're telling you the Lightning will live on as a plug-in hybrid, an EREV, extended-range electric vehicle. What they don't say is that the truck you were sold on, the one with the bi-directional power system that could run your house during a blackout, the one they spent billions marketing, is done. Gone. Fewer than 4 years in production. And the workers at the Rouge Electric Vehicle Center in Dearborn, 1/3 of them got reassigned to build the gas F-150 instead. Before they killed it, Ford had halted Lightning production twice. The first time was in early 2024. They suspended the line for 6 weeks while they dealt with a battery fire issue. Then in October 2024, they announced another production shutdown running through early January 2025. The official reason was high inventory. The real reason was they couldn't sell the trucks fast enough to cover the cost of building them. Dealers were sitting on Lightnings they couldn't move, and Ford had already cut planned 2024 production in half compared to their original projections. The warning signs were there for anyone paying attention. The company just kept the curtains drawn. Here's the part Ford really doesn't want discussed. The Lightning outsold the Tesla Cybertruck in 2025. The sales were actually moving, but Ford was losing money on every single unit. They built a truck they couldn't make profitably, promised a price they couldn't hold, and when the federal EV tax credit died on September 30th, 2025, they had their exit ramp and they took it. The Trump administration's elimination of the $7,500 consumer tax credit, gone after 15 years on the books, was the event Ford was waiting for. US EV sales dropped roughly 40% in November 2025 alone. That was the cover they needed to walk. Now let's talk about GM, because what's happening over there is arguably worse, and the numbers are starker. GM built Factory Zero in Detroit Hamtramck, spent over $2 billion converting the plant specifically for electric truck production, named it something that sounded like a mission statement, and they built it to produce 4 vehicles: the GMC Hummer EV, the Chevrolet Silverado EV, the GMC Sierra EV, and the Cadillac Escalade IQ. 4 vehicles, all electric, all expensive. The Hummer EV starts at nearly $100,000. The loaded versions push past $140,000. The Cadillac Escalade IQ, which is technically produced alongside these trucks, runs $130,000 plus. These weren't trucks built for working Americans. These were status symbols with a factory attached. And the market told GM exactly that. In Q1 2026, GM sold roughly 1,400 Silverado EVs, 1,300 Sierra EVs, and 1,600 Hummer EVs. Those aren't quarterly sales numbers that sustain a $2 billion factory. Those are numbers that explain why Factory Zero has been shutting down over and over. In October 2025, GM cut from 2 shifts to 1 shift and permanently laid off 1,200 workers. Then in November 2025, the plant went dark entirely for a month. Then it came back for a few weeks. Then in March 2026, GM idled it again, this time putting 1,300 more workers. Then in November 2025, the plant went dark entirely for a month. Then it came back for a few weeks. Then in March 2026, GM idled it again, this time putting 1,300 more workers on temporary layoff. The total cost to GM, they recorded $7.6 billion in EV-related charges during 2025. That includes a $6 billion write-it down tied to scrapping EV production plans and canceling battery supply contracts. Battery supply contracts they had already signed and committed to. Walking away from those contracts alone cost billions. And all of this happened at a company that, right now, is adding a 6th production day at its Flint assembly plant to crank out more gas-powered Silverado and Sierra heavy-duty trucks because that's what people are actually buying. Read that again. GM is shutting down its electric truck factory while simultaneously running its gas truck factory 6 days a week to keep up with demand. In April 2026, GM confirmed what insiders had been saying for months. The next generation of electric trucks, refreshed Silverado EV, Sierra EV, Hummer EV, is suspended indefinitely. Originally planned for 2028 production, industry analysts now say nothing is coming before 2030 at the earliest. Suppliers were notified with no new timeline. That's not a delay. That's a burial with a soft headline. GM's official statement was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. They said, GM has not canceled any electric trucks. EVs remain the end game for GM. What they did not say is that they can't tell you when a next-generation electric truck will exist, who will build it, or whether the infrastructure to produce it will still be standing when they figure it out. Not canceled, just frozen, indefinitely. With $7.6 billion written off. Sure. Here's what ties the Ford and GM stories together and why this matters for your wallet right now. Both companies made the same gamble. They looked at where they thought the market was going, committed billions to electric truck programs, priced the trucks high to try to recover costs, and then watched the market move differently than they expected. When the federal tax credit disappeared, the math collapsed. At $40,000 with a $7,500 tax credit, an electric truck is a conversation. At $60,000 with no tax credit, it's a hard no for most American truck buyers. And here's what nobody in the mainstream automotive press is saying loud enough. Both Ford and GM use the existence of these electric truck programs to get favorable press coverage, government goodwill, and, in some cases, government subsidies for factory construction and battery development. They built the story of the electric truck future partly because it was profitable to tell that story, not just to sell vehicles. Now that the political and financial winds have shifted, both companies are walking back toward what they were always better at, internal combustion trucks. GM is running its gas truck plant 6 days a week. Ford is redeploying Lightning workers to build gas F-150s. The pivot isn't subtle. It's just happening quietly enough that most consumers aren't connecting the dots. There's one more thing worth putting on the table: recalls. Ford issued 62 separate recalls in 2024 alone, across their truck lineup. Among them, a recall covering over 4.3 million F-Series trucks for a defective trailer brake module, a separate recall on 2024 to 2025 F-150s and Expeditions because an engine cup plug could be misaligned, causing rapid oil leaks, a transmission valve body recall covering certain 2024 to 2025 F-150s, where the gearing was machined incorrectly, leading to potential loss of reverse or unexpected forward movement when you're in neutral, and a recall on 140,000 Ranger trucks for a wiring defect tied to fire risk. None of these individually killed a model, but all of them together paint a picture of an automaker stretched thin, running fast, cutting corners, and dealing with the fallout one NHTSA filing at a time. GM had its own wave of recall activity. The pattern across both companies is the same. The push to launch new vehicles quickly is creating quality problems that land in your lap. Here's what you need to pay attention to if you own or are shopping for a truck. If you are waiting on the 2nd or 3rd generation of the Lightning, stop waiting. Ford has confirmed the EREV replacement, a plug-in hybrid version, but they haven't committed to pricing, timing, or whether it will match the capabilities of the original. The bi-directional charging, the onboard power export that made the Lightning actually useful on a job site, none of that is confirmed for the replacement. You're being asked to wait for a truck that may or may not exist in the form you want. If you're looking at a used F-150 Lightning, understand the market you're entering. Values on used Lightnings have dropped significantly as supply built up during production pauses and as EV demand softened nationally. There may be deals out there, but the service network, parts availability, and long-term support picture for a discontinued model is something you need to factor in before you sign anything. If you're in the market for a new Silverado EV or Sierra EV from GM, the current generation vehicles are still being built and sold in very limited numbers. But buying a first-generation product from a manufacturer that just suspended its next-gen program indefinitely, cut its factory to one shift, and written off billions in related investments is a risk calculation you need to make with your eyes open. When a manufacturer stops investing in a product line, the downstream support usually follows, and if you're a gas truck buyer who thought you had another few years before you needed to think about any of this, you're fine for now. Both Ford and GM are leaning into gas. The demand is there, but the story of what happened with these electric trucks tells you something important about how these companies treat you as a customer. They promised affordable trucks, raised prices 50% in a year, lost billions, and walked away without a straight answer. That's not a technology story, that's a trust story. The biggest thing these companies don't want you sitting with is this. They collected billions in goodwill, press coverage, and taxpayer-backed support by promising an electric truck future. And when it got hard, they wrote a check and left. The workers at Factory Zero didn't get a choice. The consumers who pre-ordered Lightnings at $40,000 and ended up paying $60,000 didn't get a choice. The people who bought first-generation electric trucks trusting these brands to support them long-term didn't get a choice. The companies did, and they chose the exit. The Capit and Video are eyes at 2021 series manufacturing product. Selling these brands to support them long-term didn't get a choice. The companies did, and they chose the exit. So let me ask you this. Do you think Ford and GM made these decisions because of you, the truck owner, or in spite of you? Drop that in the comments. I read every single one. And this is the kind of conversation that needs to happen publicly because the automotive press sure as hell isn't having it. If this opened your eyes to something you weren't seeing before, hit that like button and share this with a truck owner who needs to hear it. The algorithm buries this kind of content. Sharing it is the only way it reaches people who aren't already looking for it. Subscribe and stay close, because next week we're going into something that affects every single person who has financed a truck in the last 3 years, and what dealers are doing with your trade-in that you legally cannot stop unless you know the right move going in. Stay sharp, do your homework, and trust nothing they aren't willing to put in writing.